Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Now before I start this video, it's important for me to mention that the author does not seek to discredit any previous accounts or versions of events leading up to the gruesome murders. He merely offers an interesting alternative scenario to be considered.
The deal was closed, and there wasn't much more that Pat could say. Tony had closed it. In better spirits and optimistic for the following week, they went over the details of the robbery planned at the warehouse. They confirmed the firepower, and Pat promised they wouldn't be leaving any dead bodies in Holland, unless it turned into a firefight. Mickey was adamant that the kids in the warehouse wouldn't be tooled up. His Dutchman wouldn't be sending his boy along if he thought they were. An hour later, the oddly dressed rappers were noted to leave the residence of Mr. Steele by a bored detective half asleep and freezing. Sergeant Bill Handley had gone straight to D.I. Ellis when he'd found the audio picked up on Tony Tucker's phone from the bar at the Bell Pub in Horndon-on-the-Hill. It was indistinct, and most of the conversation was just static. Yet there was enough on the recording after it had been cleaned up a bit by Tony Firmin for Bill to get Suffolk and Essex Old Bill involved. It was the mention of the 2 counties which had caught his attention. It was only a couple of days after the briefing from the Super and DCI Edwards, so it was still fresh in his mind. Bill had trawled back to earlier in the day and found the incoming call asking for the meeting. The phone call he discovered was from an unregistered pay-as-you-go mobile. The number was unknown to the team. Bill had already lodged a request with DC Tony Firmin to find out where the phone slept at night. Bill knew he might have to wait a day or so for an accurate answer. So Bill, you think someone's marked Tucker's card about the operation on Steele? Is that what you're trying to say? Gov, it's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, it's what, no more than 24 hours after the operation got underway? Now how can someone be sat at the bar in the pub and be telling Tony his man's under observation and about to get his collar felt the next time he comes back from Holland with a parcel? Well, is that exactly what was said? Well, look, we can't be sure of everything, the audio isn't brilliant, but for sure Steele is mentioned, and so are Essex and Suffolk Old Bill. Now you can't know that and not know the rest. Bill pushed the point. He felt he was right in his assumptions. Well, no, I take your point. It's incredibly suspicious. I mean, it could be that Suffolk, or more likely Essex, has a problem. Have you got any idea yet who it might be? Well, no. The guy who called the meet on used a burner phone. Now, I've asked for all we can get on it, and the number's now on full record and tagged under Tucker, but I'm still waiting back for the results of the tests. Okay, good work, Bill. Not much more you can do. We just got to see how this one plays out. Old Bill may still get a result, or Tucker may wish to wash his hands with Steele. Either way, Tucker and his mob still face the same problems. And remember, Bill, I did tell you at the start of all this, you'd probably come across a few things that you'd find hard to deal with. Now, if Essex do have a rat in their force, then he'll get found out eventually. I mean, at this juncture, there's not really that much we can do. And it certainly wouldn't be the first time we've handed them something on a plate and they've managed to screw it up. Bill left the room with his head spinning. The DI was right. They'd have to let this one play itself out. Still, if Tony Tucker and crew dropped Mickey Steele out, at least it would be unlikely they'd be heading off to Holland armed to the teeth any time soon. If Steele was under observation and they'd been planning to iron him out, then maybe they'd leave it. There was always an upside to a downside if you looked hard enough. Friday morning brought clarity for Bill and the 2 DCs. They reviewed and re-reviewed the tapes and put it all together. An hour before the afternoon session, and they had the overnight sleeping arrangements worked out for the mystery burner phone. Bill did a double take when he read the information about the home's occupants. It wasn't likely to be the woman, so it must be the one and only Detective Sergeant Paul Green, who was the rat in the camp at Essex Police. Bill made an immediate request for the man's file, but he was sure it was probably the flash kid from Romford. Paul Green was a common enough name, and he could have been doing him an injustice.
But Bill just had a feeling about this one, and just knew it was him. The afternoon get-together took the regular line, usual protocol. Everyone else had their own business to discuss. Bill might have felt his focus had shifted in the last month. He was now being kept very busy with the rise of the Essex boys along the South End arterial corridor. However, Essex and East London had plenty of other action going on, and in truth the team barely scratched the surface no matter how hard they worked. They did all they could to keep up with the serious players and produce reasonable intelligence for the long game that Special Branch were playing. A number of smaller, sideline offenders, who popped onto the scene as they came on the radars of the key players, were recommended for feed into the local CID. Occasionally, they would get a chance to pat themselves on the back, when chatter amongst the big players alluded to who had been nicked that week, and was there any risk to them and their ongoing operations. Another second-hand car dealer and a couple of his cronies had just been caught in possession of several kilos of cocaine in the Romford area. It was a direct result of intelligence passed on by the team. The resulting financial loss and uncertainty it was causing amongst a couple of the bigger players on their radar was satisfying. Bill joined in the short period of backpatting going on around the team for this one. But he wanted to get back into his own stuff. Bill had worked out exactly what was planned for the Dutch armed raid, how it was going down, but now he had a bent copper in the mix. Sergeant Bill Handley wasn't sure it was the Paul Green he'd known at Romford. It was definitely a detective sergeant on the Basildon CID team. He knew that much. The file would be on his desk on Monday. Being the newest addition to the team, Bill generally went last. His targets had been smaller fry when he'd started. They were moving up the ladder fast, and the latest intelligence he had analysed showed their ambition and balls. The office wall had the key players' mugshots semi-strategically placed on it. Over the last month or two, the Tucker picture had moved up a fraction. It now had Rolf and Tate under it, and off to the side of Tate's angelic portrait was a mugshot of Mr. Mickey Steele. The Essex boys had earned their own space on the wall, and they were now the central focus of Bill's work. Okay, now my Essex boys are off to Holland on Monday. They plan to knock over a drug firm who supplied them with the crap weed a month ago. I've got the whole package, every last detail of the job in crystal clear audio. Mickey Steele's mobile is sat on the side in his kitchen in the charger probably, as he never takes the thing anywhere with him. Anyway, it came up trumps this time. Tucker reckons he's got a senior Essex copper, but I reckon that's just him giving it large. It's this DS Green who's his man, and I'm pretty sure of that. Bill went through his notes, supported by input from the rest of the team. Everyone agreed with his analysis. Mickey Steele was spot on. He wouldn't be having a problem leaving the port. Trouble was, if they alerted the local CID team, then Tucker would probably know about it from Green. The big difficulty for Bill was the action in Holland. It wasn't his call. It belonged to someone a lot further up the food chain. He presented the facts, and the analysis would go up the food chain. The strategy men, the faceless ones, would have to make the call. D.I. Ellis closed the meeting and asked Bill to come into his office. D.I. Ellis dialed DCI Edwards and went through it with him on the phone. Bill sat and listened. Ellis had the meat of it and made it clear what Bill expected to happen. Bill, I fired it up the line. Good work. What's your take on it? If they ever get into a shootout in Holland and it ever comes out that we knew what we do, well, not good, eh? Is that the right question, Gov? Well, yeah, I see your point, Bill. I guess they're going to let it play out, aren't they? It was a solemn statement from D.I. Ellis, as he sucked on a pencil. Well, you know them better than me, Gov, but yeah, I reckon they will. I mean, if it's any consolation, I think they'll get the parcel of gear they intend to steal in Holland without too much fuss. I mean, as long as Tate doesn't lose it. I do hope you're right, Bill. And what about this fast rib Steele's talking about? Do you think they'll let Suffolk know they're blown and get the Coast Guard involved? I mean, I honestly don't know what sort of methods they use to get this stuff on the table for the local CID, but my guess is they won't have the time. I mean, yeah, if Suffolk draw a blank on Steele this time, then they might work it out themselves and get him next time. But you've got to give them some credit, Bill. They ain't bad when they put their mind to it. I mean, you were CID once yourself, Sergeant. You know how it goes. Well, yeah, I know, it's frustrating work. It's even harder when you've got a dirty snake in the mix selling you all out. Well, I agree, Bill. Well, I'm sure we'll find a way to undo our Sergeant Green. But he's actually done us a small favour in this instance, if you think about it. Bill did, and D.I. Ellis was right. It was a game of cat and mouse, and the intervention of Sergeant Green had led them to getting a clearer intel. And Tony Tucker and his boys were still under pressure, and who knows where that might lead to. Bill tried to switch off over the weekend. He did some family stuff out in Upminster, but his mind kept drifting back to work. Sunday lunch and all he could think about was Mickey still bobbing about in the North Sea in his boat with a load of guns. It's exactly what Mickey was doing. He'd seen the watchers, they weren't hard to spot if you knew they were there. They'd seen him load a large call box and some other junk on board, which must be part of the fishing paraphernalia and cover story. Mickey had sailed out just after lunch. He was alongside a small fishing quay in Holland early that same evening. He settled down to get some kip on board in the small cabin. He had passed a few pleasantries with some other members of the tatty old boat fishing fraternity, the ones who spend forever painting the same piece of wood, after lots of filing and sanding, to then fill and sand again before more painting. The Dutchman's son arrived Monday morning just after 9 a.m. The quayside was hardly a hive of activity, and no one paid any heed to the brawny Dutch lad and the old fisherman as they threw some junk into the back of a white van. Tony Tucker had parked in the airport car park at Schiphol Airport, then taken the train back to Hoofddorp just one stop south. They had gotten off there as planned and done their best to look like continental commuters awaiting who knew what. Tony and Craig did their very best. Pat just complained about everything. The early morning starts for Tucker and Rolf had just been a continuation of the night for Tate. He had finally had some sleep in the car. They were all clean, although Pat probably still had enough coke in his blood to make a possession charge. The van swung into the pickup zone at the station. Mickey reached behind his seat and pushed the sliding side door open. They'd barely got out of the car park, and Pat had one of his machine pistols in his hand. Not for me. This is a bit more my type, more hitting power. Pat passed a technical-looking automatic weapon to Rolf and took out the pump-action 12-gauge. He emptied a box of shells into each pocket, then fished out 3 and loaded the shotgun, jacking one straight into the chamber. Jesus, Pat, careful where you point that thing. Rolf found he was looking straight down the barrel of the loaded gun in Pat's hand as the van took a tight corner. Pat laughed. He was fired up. 20 minutes later, they'd driven by the open-fronted warehouse once. There was a car inside with the boot open and a couple of bodies could be seen moving about. They'd seen only one other single door on the side of the building. The open roller shutter entrance was the standard width for loading lorries and vans. The premises were located on a modern industrial estate, and Monday morning looked like business as usual. The Dutchman's son drove into the warehouse, purposefully pulling the van on an angle. Pat was out the side door fast, followed by Tucker and Rolf. The startled occupants froze in the first instance, then started to run. But there was nowhere to go, other than around the boxes of whatever was on the pallets. Mickey headed straight for the tatty porter cabin, which served as the office in the small warehouse. He quickly reappeared with 2 sheepish-looking kids in front of the pistol he was holding and a carrier bag in his other hand. 4 kids were now sat on the floor with Tucker and Rolf stood over them. Pat had knocked another out who lay semi-unconscious beside a forklift truck. He was now screaming at another cowering kid spitting fire and brimstone. "Where's the fucking gear?" Most Dutch speak good enough English, but it wouldn't have mattered. The mannerism of Tate said it all. The bleeding kid on the floor had probably just not answered quickly enough. The next kid he'd asked knew the drill, and it wasn't long before their white van had cargo going in the back. They probably never got it all, Mickey reckoned, but he was glad to be on his way up the road. Tate had hit a couple of the kids on the floor for no reason. He had hit one of them hard with the butt of the shotgun. One kid looked in a bad way, and it wouldn't have taken much for Tate to go further. Tate was squealing like a kid in the back of the van as they drove away. Mickey caught the look in Tucker's eyes as he watched Tate going through the bags of weed. They had found approximately 1 kilo of coke as well, maybe even more. 2 kilos, Craig reckoned, as he looked at the package. "What's in the carrier bag, Mickey?" Tony asked. Mickey was in the front and had the carrier bag he'd brought from the porter cabin on the seat next to him. "Cash, mate. The 2 kids were having a count up in the office when I steamed in on them. I reckon there's about 30 grand in jock notes, mate, so I grabbed it. What we got back there?" "Probably half as much weed as they fucked us with, so the value about 30 grand's worth max. It could have been the same shit as before as well. There's 1 kilo of Charlie, but not sure how good it is. Say a pony's worth there." "What's in the boxes? The little fellas. How many? Maybe 50 grand's worth? Are these the same as his old man's ones?" The question from Tony was directed at the Dutchman's son who was driving. He looked over his shoulder and shook his head. He'd remained silent throughout the operation. "Right, so with the jock notes, we have about 150 grand in total. Your mate's whack would be 50 at best, I reckon. Count up the jock, you might as well leave that here for him, and we'll sort the balance in a week or so. We'll be needing more little fellas from him anyway."
Mickey knew Tony was underestimating the value of the goods, but was in no mood to start arguing, especially with Pat hyped up and the scent of blood already on his nostrils. The three Essex boys were dropped at the station, and Mickey was glad to be rid of them. He could have got in the back and had a recount on what was actually there, but there was no point. Tony had now left, and his chance to argue the size of the parcel was gone. His whack was going to be the same as the Dutchman's, 50 grand. Tucker would make a lot more, as he would get retail money on the whole parcel, so at least 200 grand to the Essex boys from the morning's work. Mickey didn't care. It levelled things, and if Tony thought he was having them over, then much easier for Mickey to be off the hook and his own man again. It was over, and any further imports from Holland would be on a fresh slate, and Mickey would be back in control of his own destiny.
You've been listening to the book Once Upon a Time in Essex. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.